This week on the BackTable Podcast.
How are these responses? Like, are we seeing trends where patients with certain comorbidities are responding slower or faster? And it's going to allow us, I think, to be able to predict beforehand, like what's the sort of average time that's going to be required to bring those PA pressures down. So using sort of predictive analytics and big data and AI, all the buzzwords, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I think, down the road, once we're able to collect, enough data, then you can sort of train these algorithms to tell you. We also hope to have, the ability to sort of track these pressures remotely, which is going to be really nice for physicians, having a mobile app and sort of, kind of using the Abiomed Impella sort of approach where you can look on the app at home and see what the pressures are and communicate with the team sitting with the patient at the bedside and be able to understand. You don't have to wait till 8 a.m. when you come in to route on the patient, before you go to bed or whatever. You can get an alert that says patient's pressures have normalized or they've come down a certain percentage. Shut this lytic off and don't expose them to additional risk. So.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the BackTable Podcast. Today, I've got another great episode in studio here in San Diego. We've got friends of the show and recurring guests, Osman Ahmed and Jonathan Paul. JP.
Yes, sir.
Go? Yes, okay, sir. Cool. They're both in town for the annual PERT Consortium happening this week in San Diego. Shout out real quick to Jonas Nash. The BackTable team got to hang out a little bit at the consortium yesterday. And thank you to Jonas for having us. It was a great consortium. We're going to talk a little bit about that. I thought I'd have them, since they're in town, come by, chat a little bit about what's happening in the PE space. Welcome, guys.
Good to see you, Aaron.
Yeah.
Thanks, Aaron. Thanks for having us.
It's been a bit since both of you have been on. Oz is obviously on every quarter talking about some expertise that he has in every space, which is great. We love it.
When do we get to do a crypto episode?
Oh, God. Yeah, I'll leave that to the other podcast. The other thousands of podcasters talking about that, right? How's PERT treating you? I mean, what have you guys done in San Diego? Anything fun?
PERT keeps getting kind of bigger and bigger every year. It's a nice venue this year. We've been able to see a lot of good sessions, hear a lot about the trials that are coming on. We can talk a little bit more about that. There's just a whole ton of clinical trials that are about to report or have finished enrollment. And I think that's sort of where we are right now. I think next year's PERT's going to be super exciting because a lot of these trials are going to be reporting and we're going to have a lot more information. But
yeah, I heard it was a little bit of alphabet soup yesterday with all these new trials. I guess anything that surprised you, anything that was something that new information, new data that came out that were just that's really awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I think to JP's point, I think it seems like we're in a little bit of a holding pattern in terms of, waiting on, like I said, alphabet soup with all these trials kind of waiting to report. Now, with that said, I think there's still some interesting stuff that's come out. I think we're kind of on the back heels of Peerless, so still some chatter about some of the results of that. And then I think for us, we were at the Thrombolex session. We saw some of the Rescue 2 on-table thrombolysis. So I think that's kind of a new, kind of a cool concept to sort of dig into a little bit and sort of see if there's any benefit there. Only 9 patients, but I think they're planning to get up to 500 eventually. So I think some of that data will be pretty interesting to see.
Yeah, that was the one thing I noticed in the exhibitors hall is there was the usual suspects, Penumbra, Inari, Boston Sci, but then you had these others that to me seemed kind of new. I mean, Thrombolex, how long have they been around for? A year or two?
They've been in development for quite a while out of Temple with Riaz Bashir. But no, they've been, I'd say 4 or 5 years. They've probably been
working on it.
And they've been available on the market for probably, I'm guessing here, but maybe 3 years, something like that.
Yeah, I think it's more in that 3-4 year range for sure.
Do you guys have experience with it in your center?
Yeah, we do. Yeah, we've used it. They're one of the only devices that's FDA approved actually for pulmonary embolism. So we're a site for PE Tract. And in order to, enroll in PE Tract, you have to use one of the FDA approved devices, which currently includes ECOS. It includes the Thrombolex device on the lytic side, and then Inari and Penumbra. So there were only 4 devices that were available to use for that. We're a pretty heavy lytics program. So we're randomizing patients and doing a lot of CDT procedures. So we've had some experience with their device, and, we think that their data is pretty compelling. So, we feel pretty good about using that and moving forward with sort of the pharmacomechanical approach to CDT. But you're right, there's a whole bunch of companies now that are filling that exhibit hall and trying to sort of differentiate between all of them. There's several thrombectomy companies now that all have, sort of small differences, and it's going to be interesting to sort of see how these all play out and how people adopt the different technologies and what are the important things that people find useful with these devices. And I think it's too soon to say. I personally haven't had a lot of experience with the devices other than just the Inari and the Penumbra, but I don't know if Oz, if you've heard any chatter on some of these other devices.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't personally. I mean, I've talked to some folks who've used the Argon device. I think they have their trial ongoing. I think there's the Symphony, there's a Cura that we got a chance to check out. So a lot of interesting devices. I think with the focus more on, can we get smaller? Can we be more efficient? How do we kind of sort of streamline these procedures? Because obviously they're super sick patients, and so just trying to figure out how to differentiate in that sense. I believe it seems to be that's the direction that it's going.
Yeah, it seems like most of the innovations really been in sort of making the devices smaller French with sort of obviously with Penumbra going to 16 French, and I think some of the other companies, Cura, maybe even 12 French, and small sort of medium bore or even small bore thrombectomy is sort of seeing the direction that we're going. But it'll be interesting to see if we're able to get the same result with these smaller catheters. I think the reason people like the Inari device is because it actually works
really
to
well.
pull clot out, right? And it's a big enough
too,
catheter
right?
to get in there and pull out those big saddle PEs. Whether these other devices will be able to do that with some of these additional technologies, whether it be, continuous aspiration, or whether it's, I've seen some of the devices have vibration at the tip of the catheter, or they have ways to sort of shear the clot with small jets of water with the Accura device to kind of break it into smaller pieces and ingest it.
Yeah.
There's all sorts of interesting innovations that are coming along to help go smaller while still being able to bring the clot out of the patient. But whether that actually turns out to be possible will be interesting to see.
Yeah. Accura definitely won the award for the creative team. I don't know if you watched their visual.
Oh yeah.
We were like, oh, I want to check this out, because they did a great job with their animation and everything. And I got to play with it as well. It is pretty impressive as a lower profile. Well, my other question, I mean, you guys are in this space with Flow Medical, and we're talking about that in a minute. But my other question was, speaking of the community docs that are out there, obviously this means there's a lot of academics, there's a lot of speakers, a lot of people involved in collecting the data. But for those people who are out there in the community trying to decide, they may only be able to get one device on the shelf. Any advice for them, how to pick something?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, this doesn't feel much different than a lot of things in IR, for example, right? We have 100 different coils, 100 different types of IVC filters. There's a lot of different products. Doesn't mean that one is definitely going to be better. I feel like always having multiple options is great, because you just find the one that works for you, the one that you like. You don't need to use 8 different coils. You don't need to use 8 different thrombectomy catheters. You just got to find the one that you like, that works well for you in your hands. And that's kind of how we feel about both, right? We don't think that thrombectomy is going to eat the world and be the only device. Similarly, we don't think thrombolysis is going to take over the world either. We just think that everybody's going to want to do something a little bit different, and probably good to have one or two of these devices in your hands. And so I think it's a very personalized sort of choice or decision.
Yeah, I think, there's so many companies. Obviously, it's not sustainable for there to be 7 different thrombectomy companies that are all sort of the same. So probably, I see this sort of going in the way, where a lot of these bigger companies are just going to have a bag, right? They're going to have a bag that includes a really good thrombectomy device, a really good thrombolysis device, and they'll have, essentially the tools available to the operator at the time of the case. And if it ends up being, a thrombectomy that doesn't go as planned, or it doesn't get as much clot out, then you transition to thrombolysis, or you try thrombolysis and it works really well, or it doesn't work really well, and you have a way to contact that same rep and say, okay, well, remember that patient we tried, let's go ahead and try something else. So I think each of these companies really needs to have all these tools available. There may be a world where there's combination therapy right down the road, where there may be models where you use one device to sort of uncork the bottle, right? You remove that big proximal clot, you place another, or even the same device that has different capabilities, right, to provide some thrombolysis. Dealing with that distal clot, I think, is going to be becoming more and more important. There was some really interesting data from Boston Scientific, actually. I want to say it was the Seattle 4 study. I don't think it's been published yet, but actually looking at pulmonary venous return, and actually showing significantly improved pulmonary venous return with thrombolysis as opposed to thrombectomy, which sort of makes sense intuitively, that you're clearing up not just the large proximal, but also the distal vessels. You're allowing the blood to actually flow through the circuit, make it into the left side of the heart, and perfuse the patient. And so So yeah, I mean, I think we're still so early. We're still learning. It's not just a big hammer sort of smacking a nail anymore. It's really understanding the biology and the physiology, whether or not, taking a big proximal clot out even matters, whether you need to really do a pharmacologic approach, or maybe there's even some other way of treating pulmonary embolism with a biologic or something like that. I think that we're so early on, right? That I just think that 5-10 years from now, we're going to be doing things differently, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think the market will also sort of set the number of devices that need to be there, whether that's 3 or 4 or 10, I think eventually that'll sort of equilibrate. I think the space is so hot, and especially on the thrombectomy side in terms of devices being developed, and that eventually the ones that are the sort of the superior products will sort of rise to the top. And I think you also mentioned a very interesting thing that we didn't talk about in terms of what's new. I feel like this idea or concept of combo therapy seems to be creeping up more and more. I feel like every meeting that at least JP and I have gone together, it seems to be like, oh, this is an interesting idea. But now it's kind of saying, okay, well, actually, it's a pretty significant percentage that I do it for my patients. So yeah, so I think those are some of the interesting things related to what you mentioned.
I mean, hospitals just aren't able to have 2 devices that do the same thing on their shelves, right? So if you have a contract with a big company and you're able to have all their other products on the shelf, and it just so happens that they also have a thrombectomy and a thrombolysis catheter, those are the products that are going to end up on the shelf, right? And so it's going to be interesting to watch the acquisitions in this space, and I think that's going to really drive, adoption, because it's going to make it really clear what devices you can actually use at your hospital, right?
Yeah. Well, that was the big news this last year, was the acquisition of Inari by Stryker, right? Again, user in the space, and we'll talk about flow, but have you seen that creates more players, more buzz? How's that impacted the space?
I think it's great for the space. Obviously, I think it sort of showcases how these really big, the big players, the really big dogs are very much interested in this space and what the value that they perceive this field to be, So, I mean, Inari is who they are. I mean, everybody knows Inari, we've been using it for quite some time, and to see that being valued by a company like Stryker that has really no sort of skin in the game, at least in VTE specifically, I think we've perceived that to be very valuable. Now it'll be interesting, I think, like JP said, where will the dominoes fall, subsequent to that? And I think some of that, at least personally, I feel like probably waiting on, a lot of these big trials to result. And obviously as physicians, we're all anxious people. We want the data today, but, we have to kind of be a little bit patient and see how it plays out. But it feels like it's right around the corner.
Again, selfishly, and full disclosure, I am an early investor in Flow Medical to the audience. But socially, you guys are in town. I wanted to have you come in and also just kind of give an update on Flow, because it's been, again, what was it, a couple of years ago, I think we had you guys on to talk about the origin story of Flow. And now here we are a couple of years later. It'd be cool to give an update to the audience on it.
Yeah, I can take that one. I mean, so kind of back to the origin story, Oz and I are in different fields, right? Oz is an interventional radiologist. I'm an interventional cardiologist. Historically, we don't speak to each other, right?
Right.
There's this turf war, and there's many days where we won't talk to each other now. But no, all kidding aside, we're good friends, and I think that's really been a huge boon to Flow, in that we've been able to bring together 2 specialties that historically haven't worked together very closely. We have very different skill sets, and I've learned a ton of medicine and procedural skills from Oz, and I think vice versa. And so we came together really to build a clinical program and to bring our skills together, and realize that kind of both of our specialties were in this space, right? And that we're sort of in silos. So if you're in one place, you think, okay, well, only IR does PEs. You're in another place, well, cardiology does all the PEs. But what we realize is it's about 50-50, right? So it made sense for us to work together and try to innovate in a way that would sort of appease to all of our colleagues. And so we're both, believers that treating the entirety of the pulmonary vasculature is super important. Getting rid of as much clot as possible is super important. Eliminating that residual clot when people leave the hospital, so-called residual pulmonary vascular occlusion. If you can get that down as much as possible, people have lower rates of readmission and lower rates of complications. And so we believe that probably will include a pharmacologic approach, and using thrombolytics is, the tried and true method of doing that. It's been around longer than any other therapy, with lower and lower dosages, with studies using shorter infusions. We found that it's extremely safe. There's some studies now, which we can talk about, that actually show it might even be safer than thrombectomy, right? There's maybe even lower rates of bleeding with low dose thrombolysis, or lower dose thrombolysis than with using 20 or 24 French devices. So, we believe it's safe and given in a way that's simple, right? So if we can create a device that can be used by most interventionalists that are able to place catheters through the heart, then I think then we have a device that can be sort of expanded, right? Right now, only about 15% of eligible patients are getting these PE interventions, right? And so there's a world out there where, it's not necessarily going to be like, should we do thrombectomy or thrombolysis? It's going to be like, what can you do at your hospital, and what is your tolerance for risk, right? And so we wanted to create a device that not only delivers thrombolytic drugs in a way that we think is more effective than the other devices, give us a way to sort of make it precise by having real-time hemodynamic feedback. So we have a fiber optic sensor built into the catheter that gives you actual pulmonary artery pressures, which you can see come down in real time, and then, determine when your stopping point is for thrombolytic drug. This can be done by essentially anybody that's able to do these procedures. We think that there's going to be a group of patients that is able to have a 2-hour infusion, for example, right? Maybe even on table, right? We have real-time feedback that says maybe I give a bolus like the Bashir device does in the Rescue 2 study. Maybe you give 8 milligrams and you see the PA pressure come down right away. Why do we need to leave in catheters for another 12 hours, right?
Right.
However, there's going to be a subset of patients that don't have any response, right? And so their clots may be a little more chronic, or they have a larger distribution of clot. That patient needs a longer duration. So we just didn't feel like a kind of a one-size-fits-all approach made any sense. And so we wanted to create a device that's going to allow sort of precision dosing, precision medicine, doing this in a way that's, we think, sort of more scientific now that we have all this data, and make it safe and effective. And so, there's a lot of stories about our pitfalls along the way and some funny things that have happened, but things are going really well. Maybe Oz can sort of talk about where we are right now. And
yeah, I mean, honestly, it's an amazing summary of our philosophy and what we're trying to do. And honestly, what's transpired since what you just said is we've actually built a team to kind of help us accomplish this. So, we're very fortunate. We obviously have Jennifer Freed, who I think we talked about last time. She might have just come on as CEO. So super dynamic, super amazing, and really has accelerated the trajectory of our company and actually made it a real company, if I could be very blunt.
I know that feeling.
Yeah. So, having a non-physician is critical to actually running a real business, So in short, the team's growing. We've brought on Todd Cruikshank, who is our COO, Chief Operating Officer, and then we've just hired Brian Wiley, who is our VP of Clinical. So we are now in the phase of where we're starting to look towards taking our device, which is a real device now, and not just in animals, but now we're trying to go sort of looking forward towards, first in human, kind of human clinical trial stuff. So, and that's where Brian's going to kind of come help, sort of lead that effort as well.
Fantastic. So, I mean, because you guys have been doing animal studies over the last, 1 to 2 years?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And had there been any surprises, device upgrades, anything that you learned?
We spent a lot of time trying to develop a pulmonary embolism model in animals, which is actually quite difficult to do, as it turns out.
Yeah,
and
that
so,
makes sense.
Pigs are difficult animals they don't tolerate hemodynamic changes very well. So we were successful with that. We spent a lot of time sort of developing that. There's been a number of physicians that have sort of gotten their hands on the device, small tweaks and things that, make the user experience better. We're to the point now where we're really happy with the device and we're moving forward with all of the crazy testing that has to be done in a good way. There's a lot of requirements that take a lot of time to complete in order to make this device, sort of safe and ready for FDA submission. So that's sort of where we are. We're kind of going through that process, and we hope to be ready for our first in human study second half of 2026. Which is going to come really soon. Obviously, with the way things go in hospitals and in contracting, that means getting started now with setting up sites and all of that.
Real quick on the technology, I mean, you mentioned the real-time feedback with the pulmonary pressures. Is there like a software component to the platform, or is it just the device itself?
Yeah, so there definitely is a hardware/software component in terms of there'll be a sort of a small capital piece. It's basically like an iPad that will accompany the patient. So that fiber optic sensor or cable will plug into that. And it'll, you'll zero it. And then at that point, then you just kind of let it run, and it will monitor the PA pressures, from as soon as you basically turn it on till whenever you take it out. So
do you guys envision like collecting data over time and then maybe there being even an AI component at some point?
It's almost like we planted this question for you,
right.
Aaron. It's like
slip a 50 under the table now.
Yes, exactly. I mean, so, right now the software, as Oz said, will track real-time PA pressures. It'll also give you a sort of a trend line to show systolic, diastolic mean pressure over time so that you can sort of see that slope. And when that slope becomes more horizontal, you sort of know that, you're maybe to the point of diminishing returns, and that's when you shut it off. But when you start collecting this huge amount of data, think about this, it's like literally pressure. You're collecting numbers every millisecond, right, for many, many hours. So it's a huge amount of data, which is going to allow us to see, in different patient populations, for example, young versus old, women versus men, different races. How are these responses? Like, are we seeing trends where patients with certain comorbidities are responding slower or faster? And it's going to allow us, I think, to be able to predict beforehand, like what's the sort of average time that's going to be required to bring those PA pressures down. So using sort of predictive analytics and big data and AI, all the buzzwords, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I think, down the road, once we're able to collect, enough data, then you can sort of train these algorithms to tell you. We also hope to have, the ability to sort of track these pressures remotely, which is going to be really nice for physicians, having a mobile app and sort of, kind of using the Abiomed Impella sort of approach where you can look on the app at home and see what the pressures are and communicate with the team sitting with the patient at the bedside and be able to understand. You don't have to wait till 8 a.m. when you come in to round on the patient, before you go to bed or whatever. You can get an alert that says patient's pressures have normalized or they've come down a certain percentage. Shut this lytic off and don't expose them to additional risk. So
I think one of the great things about Jen, among her many positive attributes, is she actually came from a background with sort of surgical software kind of a company where, is doing some of the, like those video conferencing, sort of thing. So she has a great, she has a very strong background in how to actually execute that, which was a very, sort of unintended, bonus when we sort of brought her on, which is we'll hope to capitalize on.
She always has a guy, right? Yeah. She's like, I'll call my software guy, and I'll call this guy, and we can have this built in, in a month.
Yeah.
It's so helpful to have somebody like that.
100%. Well, it's all very exciting. We'll wrap up here. Quick plug on, we just launched our new cardiology show. So you probably are familiar, Sammy Safo and Hattie Leicha they've been busy over the summer, cranking out a bunch of great content. We just released 5 episodes and then we're going to be releasing weekly episodes.
It's about time, Aaron.
I know, right? I know, it's a long time
We have
coming.
backtables too in the cath lab, so it's not just the IR suite.
I know, it's so long where the cardiologists we'd have on, and we've had some great people on the show, yourself included, where they're just like, Aaron, like, it's just still an IR show. Can we get our own show already? You launched ENT, you launched urology, so yeah, now's the time, and we're really happy with how it's turned out. But so like JP, since you're here, I just wanted to find out if there was anything from the cardiologist perspective that you could share with your cardiology peers, that came away, a big takeaway from PERT, anything to, final thoughts on that?
It's really just that, so cardiologists, as you're finding out, are incredibly data driven, right? So you need to have a 20,000 patient study with a really cool acronym, like in order to make it into a cath lab, right? Like, so cardiologists will really, really rely on evidence-based data strongly. Not always, we like toys too, and we like to try the new thing, but really to make it into the guidelines and to be accepted broadly. So I think cardiologists will be really interested in all these studies that are coming along. We sort of talked a little bit about, HI-PITHO, the Boston Scientific study is finished enrollment now. We heard that's going to report out, I think, in the spring sometime, potentially at ACC cardiologists. And then obviously, Peerless 2 is enrolling. There's a study that's being conducted in Europe called PROG 26, which is sort of HI-PITHO in other parts of the world. Again, catheter-directed lytics. There's PE Tract, which is up to 400 patients out of 500 now. We're a site for that study, so getting close to finishing enrollment. So like in the next year, we're going to have a ton of data. Obviously, cardiologists, again, super data driven. And I think if we do this podcast again a year from now, it's going to be like a totally different conversation. It's going to be like the landscape is really going to be very clear. I think right now we're like climbing that hill and you can't quite see over the horizon.
Yeah.
But I think next year we're going to be at the top of that hill where we can sort of say, okay, like this is the way this is going to go.
Same question for IRs.
Yeah, as much as it pains me to say this, it behooves IRs also to be data driven, and I think to JP's point, I think it's very important and again, I speak to myself when I say this, is, PE is a disease where it's not just like a clot and you take it out. And I think the more you go to meetings like PERT, the more you realize it's a very, very nuanced disease. It's a very, very complex disease. And it's not just about just taking clot out, So I think I would really sort of implore my IR colleagues to sort of take heed of what JP said in terms of really look at data, really understand data. And I think if you start sort of approaching this disease with that sort of more of a scientific focus, just sort of understanding the nuances of the disease and why some of the things that we've just said about whether it's thrombolysis or just device selection really do matter, and that it's not just a one, sort of device or one therapy fit all kind of algorithm.
Yeah. And, at the end of the day, it's also an access to care kind of issue. Like you said, what is the stat? Like only 20%?
Yeah, it's somewhere around like 15-20% of eligible patients are getting these procedures right now. So, you look at MI, someone presented this.
It's like 80%, right?
Yeah, like if it's a STEMI patient, it's like 90+% of patients are getting their intervention, right? Stroke patients and even non-ST elevation MI or sort of like the less severe heart attacks, it's still like 60% of patients are getting interventions, right? So we're still in the early days. This is still very early.
Yeah. So, getting this information out to community docs, it's scary, right? PEs are scary. I think that's where you guys are more like used to these acute situations. IR is not so much. But what I saw, at least in my old group in Dallas, where once they got some cases under the belt and like, oh, our skill set applies here, and it's not as scary as I thought. It's pulling out a clot, same as a DVT. I think it's getting over that hump, that challenge where it's entering your space a little bit and teaming up with the cardiologist to learn from each other. Not, there's always kind of some turf stuff going on.
Honestly, I think that's like, if I've learned one thing from this whole flow experience, it's that there's really no reason we should be setting up these fake walls. And I've learned so much from the IR team. And Oz and I have scrubbed in together doing difficult cases. And I don't think that I could have done the case without his help. And I think that it's better for patients, right? It's better for the hospitals when we're able to sort of do one procedure together instead of two procedures separately. And it's just like, I think that these walls that we've established need to come down, and we all need to kind of work together. I've even heard of some hospital centers or some places are talking about even like having interventional physicians all be under the same umbrella,
we talked
right?
about that.
Interventional cardiologists and interventional radiologists, like we're way more similar than we are different, right? And
even and
surgeons, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Because and we can finish on this note, but like the whole multidisciplinary thing, we're seeing practices open up where it's a vascular surgeon and IR, and their skills are complementary.
Yep.
And you got like the Jim Melton practice with Blake, and they've got cardiologists all under the same roof. It's kind of nice. It'd be cool if that was happening in an academic center too, But well, thank you guys so much for coming.
Thanks,
we'll wrap
Aaron.
it up there. Yeah.
Great to be here. Thanks, Aaron.
Thanks, man.
Thank you so much for joining us on BackTable Cardiology.
If you have not already, be sure to follow and subscribe, rate the show 5 stars, and share with a friend.
If you have any questions or comments, direct message us at _BackTableCards
On Instagram, LinkedIn, X, TikTok, Blue Sky, or YouTube.
BackTable is hosted by Hadi Lisha
And Sami Seifo,
Our production team is led by Kieran Gannon,
Aaron Bowles,
Gabe DeGrazio,
and Josh Spencer.
Design and digital marketing led by Brian Schmitz.
Social media and PR by Donato Cavuto.
Administrative support provided by Judy Dela Cruz.
Music by Aaron Bowles.
Thanks again for tuning in.
We'll see you next time.